Welcome to Between the Before and After, a podcast about the stories that shape us. I'm your host, Coach John McLernan, and each episode I bring you an inspiring guest with a moving story that shines a light on the power of the human spirit. Before we dive in, I want to let you know about two very important things. Number one, the stories shared here are often gritty, raw, and vulnerable, and very likely will include speaking about sensitive topics suited for a mature audience. Number two, this podcast is also broadcast live on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. So on whatever platform you follow myself or Freedom Nutrition Coaching, you have the opportunity to participate in this discussion during the live stream. And we encourage your participation both by commenting and asking questions. And so this podcast is about exploring the stories that take place between the before and after photos, not just in the realm of weight loss, but in all areas of life. So let's dive in. All right, welcome back to another episode of Between the Before and After. I'm very delighted to be hosting Gemma Bailey from currently in Bulgaria, actually on the Black Sea coast. So, but you'll notice there's a slight accent here because originally from the UK, and I think you still call that home. So,
I do.
Great to yeah, you're just escaping from home temporarily.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I like to give people a chance to kind of introduce themselves and describe a little bit about what you do, and then we're going to dive into your story. So I'll pass it over to you and let you share what you're doing currently.
Oh, lovely. Thank you very much. So I am a company director of a few different companies, one which specializes in training in a subject area called neuro-linguistic programming. So we offer training and coaching around this particular modality, which is very helpful for people who want to improve the way that they're thinking or feeling. I have an organization which is a franchise called NLP for Kids. And again, it's using NLP, but specifically for children and young people who are perhaps looking to overcome issues such as anxiety or to improve their mental well-being. And then the third most significant one is a non-profit company called Superheroes, where we help people in our community to access support around mental and emotional well-being if they cannot afford to access those services privately otherwise. So yeah, those are the things that typically keep me pretty busy.
I was going to say they probably keep you very busy. Most people are busy enough with kind of one organization, let alone three, including a non-profit. One of the things that interests me is just neuro-linguistic programming, or NLP. I imagine there's still a lot of misconceptions around what this is, whether people think it's, some kind of mind control, subversive mind control or something like that.
Yeah.
How would you describe NLP for the average person?
I would say it's a series of different strategies. In some ways, you could say it's different activities that you can do that give you a sense of better control over your emotions. A big portion of it is the linguistic part, so the communication. So how you communicate not just with other people, but how you internally talk to yourself as well. And so it's a useful way for you to be able to coach yourself into becoming more positive, or just to sort of call yourself out on your own BS that you might come up with sometimes, or the limitations that you might place around yourself because of a negative thought. So it's very helpful from that perspective, but I think it's also really good for things like rapport building, and being able to connect in a better way with other people as well.
Right. Now, when I hear things like sort of internal dialogue, one of the thoughts that comes to mind is something like affirmations. Would this be a like a tool in the toolbox of someone using NLP? Is there kind of a difference between maybe an affirmation and how NLP might get used?
Yeah, I would say there's a difference. I think there's a lot of NLP crosses over into a lot of other personal development worlds. So there's probably a good handful of people that would say absolutely there's a connection between positive affirmation and what you might do in NLP. I'm maybe a little bit more pragmatic in how I use NLP, in that I'm not sort of full force fluffy positive thinking necessarily. My definition is that it's more about having useful ways of thinking, which might not always mean that you say something to yourself in the most positive, fluffy, yay, I feel happy kind of a way. But sometimes, it's about being honest with yourself, being honest about your circumstances, and using the affirmations that are going to move you in the right direction, which are not always the most positive ones.
Right, and I really like that. I think I resonate with that. Just to use a nice another new agey term there, but really, just the idea that we're being practical about how we use something like this, because I believe that we actually set ourselves up for more disappointment if we
Mm,
create an affirmation that there's quite a gap between something we aspire to and where we're presently
yeah.
at, because we're kind of setting ourselves up for some kind of discouragement or disappointment.
Yeah, 100%. So one of the things that you might do with NLP is to create more like stepping stone type statements, so stepping
Okay.
stone affirmations that can almost sort of transition you from where you are to where you want to be, rather than claiming that you are where you want to be when actually you're not.
Right. Yeah. Because I think there's an element of us that's kind of aware if we're like BSing ourselves about something where we're like,
Yeah, exactly.
you
Yeah,
know, and I
one
think
of
like,
the things that I say to clients is, you want to be able to tell yourself not just what you want, but kind of be realistic about where you are. Because if you don't, there's a part of your brain that's going to respond with, "You're lying."
right, right. I say like I'm 40 years old. So let's say if no amount of sort of affirmation and positive thinking is going to help me become a professional golfer when I think I've golfed once in my life outside of mini golf. And so there's an element of like, sort of delusional, almost we could call it like delusional positivity, where people try to use this to
Yeah.
elevate themselves to something that really is kind of outside the realm of possibility.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's dangerous in a
Mm,
way, because it means then that when you realize that distinction between, where you are and where you want to be, actually it's a big gap. And so you're going to fall a lot harder than you would do
mm.
otherwise. So yeah, I think it's important that we're realistic about things, especially when we're using strategies that are useful for helping people to change the way in which they're thinking. Some people I think feel a bit cautious around words like manipulation, but in a sense
Mm.
that kind of is what NLP is. It is about manipulation, but it's about doing things in an ethical and helpful way. And persuading people to go in the direction that they want to go in, not just manipulating them for our own ends.
Right. Well, I like to think the difference between manipulation and persuasion is intent. And maybe
Yes,
that's how I
100%.
would refer to, because when we hear the word manipulation, I think it's rarely do we hear that like in sort of a good way. So I heard that, and that really stuck with me, because you're right. Really, the
Yeah.
elements of this are the same, but what is the intent
Yes.
behind that? Is this for my personal gain to take advantage of you in an unscrupulous way, or is this an ethical
Yeah.
way for me to convince you to actually move towards like your full potential?
Yeah, 100%. So context is everything.
Mm.
I think if I was going to a chiropractor, I want them to sort of manipulate things in the right way. I
Right.
don't
Yeah.
just want them sort of persuading
Yeah.
my
I'm going to
body to do the
persuade your
things I'd like
pelvis
it
back into
to
alignment or something.
do.
True, true. Actually, that is a positive way to use manipulation.
Yeah.
So, this is like really interesting work, and if we sort of rewind the clock a little bit here and start getting to a
Mm.
bit of your own story, is this something you thought, growing up, that you thought you were gonna, find yourself doing NLP and hypnotherapy and this sort of thing?
No.
Not even remotely.
No, no, not even close. No, so I suppose the one commonality, the one thread maybe that's there is that I started out working with children as a nursery nurse. So I was working in private daycare settings. And the thing that interested me most about that work was behavior stuff.
Mm,
So I was really good with the children that were really disruptive and at again manipulating them potentially into behaving in a more socially amenable way,
mm, mm,
and and just kind of pulling potential from them. So for example, one of the children, there's a few of them that kind of get engraved in your mind a little bit. So one of them was what I now know to be selectively mute when
mm.
she started at nursery. So it's a bit of an anxiety disorder. The child can speak, but they choose not to, really, because they feel anxious in that new situation that they're in. And mutism is something that for children who have that, it can sort of last throughout their entire school life. And
Interesting.
again, I didn't know that at the time, but I just really worked on this little girl until she started speaking, and turned it around quite quickly, and then later sort of dissected it and went, oh, there was actually some strategies in there. There's some things that other people can follow. So I enjoyed working with children for that reason, because of the behavior change stuff. So I would say that's probably like the single commonality between what I was doing then and how I ended up doing what I chose to do now.
Yeah, and so I guess I'm kind of curious if there is a connection, because you had also quite a difficult upbringing. And maybe that's an understatement, or feels like a bit of an understatement. You had quite a challenging upbringing. You faced a lot of adversity, and maybe rather than me state it for you, I'll let you share a little bit about that, what you care to share, because I'm kind of curious if this has influenced maybe the path that you're on now.
Yeah, I would say so. I don't know as if, again, at the time, I don't think I would have acknowledged that there was any sort of conscious decision around that. But now, looking back, I'm like, oh, yeah, that kind of makes sense. So in terms of my growing up, so I've got a half brother and a half sister on my mum's side, who are older than me. My brother was given up for adoption, so although I knew about him, I didn't actually meet him until I was about 14. And we have sort of, I don't know, I guess like a complicated relationship now, because we didn't grow up together. Fair enough. It's a bit strange. And then, so his full sister, so my half sister, she came along next. So she has severe learning difficulties and epilepsy. So she's, to this day, actually living in a full-time residential care home, where she has 24/7 one-to-one support, because she has drop seizures, is her form of epilepsy, which means that they can come on really suddenly without warning, and she will just sort of fall to the floor. So they're quite severe. Wow. And so that was from my mum's first marriage. Then she married my dad. I came along, and actually I think that they were probably two people that never should have got together, but they did. And so quite early on, so it was my mum, my sister was still at home back at that stage, and myself, all ended up in a women's refuge as a result of the fighting between my mum and dad. We went back home, and then things all kicked off again. So we ended up living in the refuge for probably about a year or so, whilst their divorce was going through. And then eventually we went back to the family home. My dad had moved out. And so for a while it was my sister, my mum and myself all living back there. And then that was until social services actually took my sister into care. And that was when she then started living away and living in full-time care from that point onwards. So from then on, it was me and my mum. And I would see my dad at the weekends. He'd moved back to his parents' house, so my nan and granddad. But my dad was a very heavy drinker. So in some ways you would probably say he was a binge drinker, because it was pretty much a sort of Friday, Saturday, Sunday thing. But he was pretty committed. So my weekends at my dad's were largely spent with my grandparents, whilst my dad was in the pub. And actually that was it, you know, it was just the way of life, really. My mum, meanwhile, was actually quite challenging to grow up with, because what I know now but didn't know then is that she probably had a personality disorder that was undiagnosed. So she had been in psychiatric care herself a few times over the years, but obviously we've got a much more refined diagnosis system now than perhaps in the 70s and the 80s. So it's likely that she had something like borderline personality disorder that didn't ever get diagnosed. And so that meant that she experienced some very high and low emotions, almost a little bit in a bipolar sense, but without any sort of psychosis attached to it. and she would get very fixated on relationships that she had. So when she had a new boyfriend, nothing else in the world existed apart from him. And then when those relationships came to an end, which inevitably they did because she was very intense to be around, then it was like all hell would break loose. And so it was just very, very challenging to be around her in either of those dynamics when either of them was existing.
So you had really, if we think of like a normal childhood, and nowadays I'm not quite sure what we could call normal, but I think maybe we have this idea of maybe growing up with a family, maybe having a mom and a dad, and some sort of semblance of stability in the home. Like you had really none of that. Thinking back to, you know, what age were you, or I guess how much older is your sister than you? And I guess what age
Um,
were you when you sort of became aware that, hey, there's something different about my sister and I need to support her somehow?
yeah, yeah, good question. So she is uh, 3 and a bit years older than me. So she has a birthday coming up soon. So at that point, she'll be 4 years older than me.
Mhm.
I know that because I've been told by my family that when I was probably around 3 years old, I went into nursery 2 school terms earlier than most people usually do.
Right.
And that's because I was starting to, well, maybe not starting to mimic her behavior, but I was not developing as quickly as I should have done because I guess I was, I'd started to overtake her developmentally and then realized that something's not right about that. And so I started to plateau. And so I was put into education earlier than I should have been to, in a sense, distance me from her so that I would have more socialization with people that were more like, developing in the way more like I should have been developing at that point in time. And I don't know. I mean, I remember being very young and friends saying things about her or asking questions about her. And I don't know if it was just because, again, it was normal for me that she was the way she was. It wasn't like she'd changed. I didn't
Right.
have other siblings at home, so I didn't really have a point of reference to compare how she was. So I don't know when I really noticed that she was different. It's almost like I always knew that in a way.
Sort of had an intuitive understanding of it. And I imagine you have like quite maybe we could say complex, but in a good way, a relationship with her. Deeply caring about her and really, becoming probably one of her primary caregivers, even somewhat early in life, because of the challenge that your mom faced and the absence of your father from I'm not sure what age that was, but that seems like a lot to sort of put on the shoulders of kind of a young child, and then like put in nursery at an earlier age. So kind of like almost like forcing a level of development. And we're looking at this, of course, through the lens of hindsight, but
Yeah.
you know, um, what sort of relationship did you have with your sister in early childhood?
I think that when she was living at home, so when we were very young, I remember us kind of playing side by side, and probably experiencing a lot of the gripes that most siblings do, like she would take my stuff, break my stuff, those sorts of things.
Right. Yeah.
And then I think when she was taken into care, my mum had probably a combination of a tremendous amount of guilt, but also because she would attach in very strong ways to certain people. My sister was one of them. Like those two were like peas in a pod in a lot of ways, and I was very much sort of on the fringes of that relationship. So when they were together, I don't know, it was like quite bizarre, but they would literally be gazing into each other's eyes. in the beginning, my sister actually had a little bit of language, which she's now lost, but you know, she would sing with my mum, and they were just entwined with each other. And obviously, as I got older, I wasn't interested in sitting there singing nursery rhymes endlessly anymore. So I was becoming more distant. And then my sister was moved, which at the time it was said was due to the cost of her care was cheaper in Wales. And so she was moved to North Wales, so quite a long way from where we lived. My mum didn't drive at the time, so we would rely on a social worker to take us on the 4-hour trip to see my sister a couple of times a year. So I think what happened then was that I was growing up and changing, not just because I wasn't as interested in that close relationship that they had with each other and the singing and stuff that they would do together, but I was physically changing. So I did not look the same from one visit to the next from my sister's perspective, because I wasn't that little tiny person that she'd left behind anymore. You know, at some point it was kind of, you know, squared up to her, and then I was bigger than her. And I think that for a long time, like probably a good couple of decades, she either didn't know that I was the same Gemma, because she knew, like Gemma from pictures, they said that she would sort of react if they held up a photograph of me when I was little and would say, look, it's Gemma. That, you know, there would be some sort of recognition in her eyes. When she saw me in person, she had zero interest. So she either didn't know that it was still me, or she just didn't like me very much. And to this day, I'm not 100% sure which one it was.
Yeah.
And now that we're in a very different situation. With my mum became very unwell later in her life, so she had a lot less contact with my sister, and I really stepped up at that stage, and you know, kind of rebuilt the relationship with her. And now when she sees me, she definitely recognizes me. Now, whether she recognizes me because I'm someone that's kind of persistently been there over the last few years, or whether she now knows that I'm her little sister from all those years ago, I don't know. And I don't think I ever will.
Yeah. And that's something I guess you just kind of make peace with. You know, and you mentioned there's a period of time where you had to live in a refuge. And I'm not sure if over here we might say that's like a women's shelter. Is that the sort of...
Yes.
What age were you when you had to go and spend like this year living in shelter?
So the first time I think I was about 3. The second time I was 5 going on 6, or 6 going on 7, somewhere around that kind of age bracket. Yeah, I remember my mum coming to pick me up from school, and you either know it's going to be really, really good or really, really bad if your mum shows up in the middle of the school day and says, I need to take her out. And as it happened, it was really, really bad. And so she came and collected me and said, you know, you need to say goodbye to all your friends. We're leaving. And that was the first I heard about it. So yeah, I remember going to the bus stop, and, you know, she had a couple of bags for us, and she didn't know if we were ever going to go home, when we would ever go home, if I was ever going to see my dad again, if I would be able to go back to the same school. And that was it. And then we were in the refuge for a good year or so that second time around.
Yeah. I mean, I just I think, my goodness, you know, especially in these formative years, you know, your life was really in a lot of upheaval. What did that mean for you, kind of going into like your teen years and whatnot? You know, how do you sort of look back on that? Was it difficult for you to navigate, you know, socially? You know, what was that like for you?
I think that I did end up coming back to the same primary school, and I was instantly I was at a disadvantage already. I was at a disadvantage because I'd started nursery 2 terms early. So the group that I'd got started with left
Right.
And then I was still at the nursery. So all of those people I'd made friends with vanished. And then I got the next year group, and I did a whole year at nursery with what would have been my academic, my correct academic year. Then I went into primary school and left to go to the refuge, came back, left for a whole year to live in the refuge. When I came back, we had an odd number of girls. So I kind of came in as the odd number in my class. So everyone was paired up. And then I was just like this, like one random person that kind of showed up. And so, and I think it's really a thing with girls as well, especially like girls are really like, you need to have a best friend, like you need your wingman. Mm-hmm. And so I spent my primary years just kind of floating around like different pairs that I would try and latch onto. And I remember being like just devastated all the time that I didn't have a best friend, or that someone new would join. Like I remember two new people joined at different points in time, and both of them then left. And it was just like everybody's leaving. So I think by the time I got to secondary school, I was partly happy because it was a fresh batch of people, and it gave me a little bit of potential for being able to like make some new relationships there, and to find my one true love. And but also probably didn't really have a lot of the social skills that everyone else had spent some time developing, and I'd got used to being by myself, so I actually wasn't always very good at being around other people. And I'd also, as I got into my teenage years, started to identify that my mum was batshit crazy. Right, and so I was really working very consciously to be the opposite to her. And because I could see that she was so intense in her relationships and so needy, I was the opposite. So I could be, quite distant from people at times and feel very sad about it, but also stubbornly, kind of stick with that because I just didn't want to show up in the way that she did.
Wow. Yeah. And, I think it must be really fascinating, like knowing what you know now, doing the work you do, having the education and life experience you do now as an adult, to kind of look back at this younger Gemma and how you were, trying to navigate after the foundation that was laid down in early childhood. Now you're trying to navigate these teen years. I'm kind of curious, actually, what you would say to like teen Gemma if you could offer her like a message of, what would you say?
What would I say? I think I would say that just keep working hard, and it is all going to be all right in the end. I think I was very sad like a lot of the time, and I was very keen to get out, although I didn't quite know what I was wanting to get out of or where it was that I was going. I would probably give myself some better advice around career choices, because choosing to work with children, as much fun as it was and as much, great life experience it gave me, it pays really badly. So I didn't really set myself up for the goal of getting away from my family, because I couldn't afford to.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, I think that there were some advantages to not necessarily, and I think a lot of the social stuff I did figure out, but I still had a tendency to sort of flip from one person to the next and not really kind of pin myself down with anybody. But there were some advantages in that I probably worked a bit harder in some aspects because I was more committed to the work than I was to the friendship groups. And certainly at the point where I got a little bit older and maybe got a bit more confidence from the fact that, I was introduced to alcohol and those sorts of things. Like as soon as I started going into that phase and like the slightly more kind of party phase, the socializing stuff got way easier, but the focusing on my work stuff got an awful lot harder.
Say, alcohol has a way of doing that. It functions as a social lubricant to sort of reduce the anxiety that we have around socialization. I don't know that that's entirely a good thing. And I mean, which kind of points to a curious question, because you mentioned your dad's battle with alcohol, and it really gripped him. And again, imagine you would look at him with at least some degree of compassion later in life, understanding again what you do around health and mental health and so on. But back then, did you have any sort of reticence around alcohol because of maybe what you'd seen?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because I think when I was very young, I was conscious that his drinking was a problem, not necessarily because I'd noticed that independently, but mainly because my mum used to be where and the fact that he drank as much as he did, and yeah, he animosity. Then I would say when he is kind of useful because formed to actually start having a relationship with him, and for us to spend time together and have a bit of a laugh with each other. And also it meant that my drinks were always paid for.
Right.
Yeah.
So you did.
There was
things broke up a little bit there for a minute when you were sharing kind of about that, but you did sort of manage to develop a different relationship with your father as you got older, and as alcohol became an option for you as well. And
yeah.
what did you see differently? Because I wonder what maybe your impression of him would have been, because you ended up being with your mom and you ended up like splitting. Your mom and your dad ended up splitting. But I wonder if like at that point you had a different impression of your father than you did like at this point when he started, you're now an adult and we can share a drink together kind of thing. How did that perspective shift?
The pendulum swayed quite severely in both directions at different points in my life. So I would say in the early days, I was very much team mum, because she was my main caregiver, and he was just not really there. And then as I started to get older and I started to kind of independently see my mum's behavior and the problems that was causing, I also sort of had this opening with my dad to spend more time with him, because I was not really old enough to drink, but when you have a dad who spends every weekend in the pub, all the right people.
Right.
So at that point, I was probably more distant from my mum and more resistant towards her, and really sort of wanting to build and grow the relationship with my dad, and even things like kind of inviting him to college events and things like that, which I would have never really done before. I started actually, actively wanting him there for that sort of stuff, which he wasn't great at. He wasn't great at doing that stuff. So inevitably, he did end up disappointing me. And I think by then, in my sort of early adulthood, by that stage, I was like, they're both crazy. Like, right. I don't stand a chance with either of these two.
Yeah. And you think, well, how did you turn out somewhat normal?
I know, right? So, and this is one of the things that my friends joke about quite a lot, is they're like, what happened to you? And I say that I must have a very rebellious personality, but I didn't rebel in a way that I kind of went, well, this is bad, so I'm going to make it worse. I rebelled in a way that was like, this is bad, so I need to do the opposite. I need to be the opposite to these people to try and make it better. And I can't honestly say that it was all plain sailing. It definitely wasn't. You know, I definitely screwed up a lot, but the vast majority of the time I was, you know, being relatively sensible and level-headed, all things considered. And
given the foundation that you kind of, it was laid early in life, as we've touched on, I think it's really interesting just to see how that, because I think the first 7 years of life are really, really powerful in terms of what the foundation lays for the kind of person that we turn into over. Now, I don't believe it's impossible to kind of change that, but it's really difficult to kind of course correct after having gone through that. And so it's really remarkable that you had the ability to even to do that. You originally studied childhood or like early childhood education.
Yeah.
How did this eventually lead into you going into sort of psychology and I guess NLP and hypnotherapy and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so I got appendicitis, and I was signed off work for a month because it was a fairly hefty operation back in those days. And I was, so by that stage, I'd made it to management level. I became a nursery manager when I was about 24, 25, so it's like really early. And I peaked a bit too soon, and I was
nowhere to go from there.
Yeah, no, there's nowhere else to go from there. So I was convalescing, watching TV, and I saw Paul McKenna on a talk show, and he was talking about this new thing called NLP. So he wasn't doing his crazy stage show stuff anymore with hypnosis, and they filmed him working with a lady who had agoraphobia, and you know, he maybe spent an afternoon with her or whatever, and then they filmed her walking along the embankment of the River Thames to the television studios for her interview. And I thought, that's some good shit. So I was like super interested in it, and also was really, I think, thinking of it for myself at that point in time, because I felt very stuck in that I had a very niche qualification, and I just didn't see where else I could go with it apart from the stuff I'd already done. So I was looking for some inspiration around, okay, what could I do next with my life that doesn't require me going back into full-time education, you know, something that I can do quickly, like I can learn it fast, and something that, you know, I can build it and grow it. And yes, I ended up looking up NLP and hypnotherapy. The two sort of do come side by side in a lot of ways. And I ended up doing a residential course in Scotland, which was a 3-month course. It was 3 weeks spread over 3 months in total, which was both NLP and hypnotherapy. And yeah, the rest, as they say, is history.
Yeah. And so, I mean, in this time since you'd become a professional, both your mom and dad have passed away, if I understand correctly. And
Yes.
Was it with your father? Was it related to his alcoholism or?
Yeah, I would say so. So he, by the end, had COPD. He had high blood pressure, diabetes. He was morbidly obese. He had a hole in his liver. And then I think in the end, what happened was his kidneys started failing. And as a result of that, the salt wasn't getting filtered from his blood properly, and so he had like a cardiac arrest. And I'd moved away to a different county, not miles away, but away for a short period of time, a few years, and I just moved back to my hometown where both of my parents still lived. And it was within sort of 3 months of moving back to Hemel Hempstead that he was rushed into hospital the first time. And I kind of knew that we were on a slippery slope, because he'd already done stuff like, you know, giving me a copy of his will and saying, this is my bank account information, and bits and pieces like that. So I think he had probably been told that there were certain things going wrong that they were not going to be able to fix. And so we had these incidents of him sort of going into hospital with the blues and twos going. And so I sort of knew, okay, we might be maybe a few months, maybe a year away from something significant happening here. And he never stopped drinking throughout the whole of that time. So yeah, I would definitely say that, alcoholism plus lifestyle, it was really what caused that.
Yeah. What was it like for you when you got the news that he had passed away?
So he was in hospital already, and they were going to discharge him. And it got to the Friday, and I think his blood sugars had gone like really wonky. So they had kept him in and were going to discharge him on the Monday, because they don't tend to sort of let you go over the weekend. And so I'd said, I'm not going to come in and see you, because he'd been in and out of hospital for so long. It's really chaotic when you get a call to say someone's in hospital and you're like, right, I've got to drop what I'm doing and go to their house and get their stuff and take it to the hospital. And then they're probably going to demand another few bits and pieces that I've forgotten. And, you sort of end up in that charade. So I'd kind of neglected myself for a period of time. And I remember saying to him, I'm not going to come and see you because I've got a floor robe, which is a bit like a wardrobe, but it's when all your stuff is on the floor instead of in the wardrobe. And so I'd not gone in to see him, and I got a call from the hospital, and they said he's gone into cardiac arrest. We're working on him now. And I was a bit like, so does that mean that he's actually died? Or like, when you say you're working on him, well, what are we saying here?
Choice of language, because the Brits sometimes, they have a linguistic way of sort of dodging the hard news.
Yeah. And I was like, because I'm in a different town, and I'm going to need to run to my car, and then I'm going to drive like a crazy person. And if I don't need to drive like a crazy person, then I would rather that you told me that I still need to come to the hospital, but I don't need to drive like a crazy person. And she was like, just get here now. And he had died, and I had driven like a crazy person. So yeah, I think I knew as soon as I got the call, like, this is it. But I didn't know if I was going to be kind of walking into, like, you've got 10 minutes to say goodbye, or I just didn't know until I got there. And then, yeah, weirdly, I was quite shocked. I don't know why, but yeah, I was, and I think it was so dramatic as well. That was the other thing.
Right.
Because I got into the hospital and then I couldn't find anybody. Like, there was no one on the ward, no one at the nurses station. And then I was like, I don't know what I'm supposed to, like, there was curtains pulled around him. I'm like, do I peek around the curtains? Like, what do I do? And then eventually someone came and found me and said, take a seat. The doctor's going to come and see you. And then they left me there for about 20 minutes. So I think it was a lot of emotion that built up. So when they did, and then even then, they didn't sort of say, we're very sorry, he's passed away. It was, this happened, and we did this, and we want you to know that we did everything that we could. And I was like, can we just cut to it? Like, what's happening here? So yeah, it was a very like, emotionally charged situation for sure.
Yeah. So were you in the room just like on the other, and he was like literally on the other side of the curtains, or his body was on the other side of the curtains, kind of thing?
So I was on one side of the corridor in like a family room, and then he was in the ward opposite with the curtains drawn around the bed. So yeah. It was very weird, very strange.
Yeah. And I mean, did you feel kind of a sense of relief, a sense of, I mean, obviously there'd be a sense of loss and grief as well, but yeah, what
I think initially I was relieved that the anxiety around when is this going to happen was gone. But I had never planned a funeral before. So I was super anxious about all of that. And I was like, is there a book? Like, do they give you a guidebook on how to do, like, what do I do? And, you know, like probate and dealing with his estate. And I was just like so overwhelmed by all of that. And it wasn't just I didn't know what to do. I was just as overwhelmed when I figured out what I did need to do and realized that, you know, I've still got to try and deal with that stuff. Because you kind of think like, now he's gone, I won't be panicking and rushing around like a crazy person while still trying to run my businesses. And it's like, no, actually you will. You're still going to be rushing around like a crazy person trying to run your businesses, but now you're also going to be planning a funeral, speaking to debt collectors, trying to sell a property, you know, all of this. Yeah, it was really overwhelming.
No kidding. And how long ago was that? Because from there, there's also, you know, your mother had received a diagnosis at that point. And what was sort of the gap there?
Yeah. So he died about 7.5 years ago, and the day that he died, literally the day that he died, I realized there is something very wrong with my mum. And so I'd come back from the hospital, literally like from he's just died, got back, and the first thing I did was I went to my office to call my clients that I was due to see the next day to say I will not be seeing you because I've had a bereavement. And then from there, I phoned my family members that didn't know. And from there, I phoned his friends to tell them that he'd passed. So when I phoned my mum, I said, it's just to let you know that my dad has just died. And she said, how much do you think you're going to get for the sale of his flat? And I went, I have no idea about that right now. I have no idea. So I was like, that is a really weird thing to say. Like, he's literally just died. I'm genuinely quite sad.
Yeah.
So I left the office, I went home, and then my doorbell went, and it was my mum. And I'm kind of like, whoa, like snot all down my face. Went and opened the door, and she said, Nan and Granddad said I should come and see how you are. And I went, well, you don't need to be here if you don't want to be here. And she said, I don't mind, but can you put the X Factor on? And I was like, wow, okay, fine. So, long story short, after probably about 6 months of that kind of tactless conversation, I got her in the doctors, and they did like a dementia test, which she aced and was absolutely fine. And then I was fairly sure that there was definitely something not right. So she got referred to psychiatry, and the psychiatrist spoke to her on her own and didn't really talk to me very much at all. So when we got to the end of that appointment, the psychiatrist said, she's fine. The problem is that you've moved back to the area and it feels very intense for you because you're not used to having her in your life this much. She's retired, she's got more time on her hands, she's annoying you more, you recently lost your dad. So basically, it's not her, it's you. So I refused to leave the room until they agreed to a brain scan. And I wanted an MRI, which is quite expensive. So they said no and agreed to a CT scan. But the psychiatrists were so confident that they were right and I was wrong that they closed her case. So she was discharged. And then when the scan results came back, there was no one to interpret the scan. So they went back to her GP with a note on them that said there are spaces in, there are CS spaces in the frontal lobes. and her GP phoned me and said, I don't really know what this means. So we're going to have to now get back in the system again, get these interpreted by a neurologist. And then that kind of got us on the road to the right people. But it took about a year from that point to actually, get seen. And things were declining quite rapidly with her behaviour. So she was diagnosed with something called behavioural variant frontal temporal dementia, or is commonly called FTD. So it's a lot like motor neurone disease, but she had, as I mentioned, the behavioural variant, which meant that the first thing to decline was her behaviour. So she lost empathy, she lost the ability to sort of read other people's emotions, she became quite obsessive about certain things, she angered very easily, she started like mismanaging her money and gambling, and just like stalking people, which had been a feature before anyway, but like it was like a whole new stalking game that she sort of put in place. And it just got more and more and more chaotic and very, very difficult to manage.
Yeah, that's a lot just to process. Like, you already had a bit of a chaotic relationship with your mom, and then and then this sort of final development. How many years was this sort of progressing?
So I think with hindsight that there was definitely some stuff that was happening before my dad died, like before that day. So she'd been in trouble at work. And she'd had a couple of disciplinaries, and I think all of that was relating to poor decision making, behaviour change. She developed some like tics, if you like audible tics, which she had awareness of but couldn't control. So there were things like that, so I would say she probably started developing the symptoms when she was in her maybe like 50s, late 40s, 50s. And then she passed away when she was 68. So it was probably like those, the sort of last 7 years, it was like there's definitely something wrong. The last 5 of those was you need to be in full-time care now. And then probably the last 4 were just a shockingly sad quality of life. And it was very difficult because, I became her power of attorney, took over, everything with respect to her health and well-being, finances, sold her house, cleared the house out, did all of that stuff independently. But then I also had my sister, so I became next of like legal guardian for my sister, next of kin, power of attorney, deputyship, all of that jazz for her as well. So it was a lot, and it all happened simultaneously. And it was especially difficult because everyone was very kindly sort of highlighting what I was doing and how good and virtuous that made me. But the reality was that I hadn't had a great relationship with her in a lot of ways, and was quite resentful of what I was having to do, which I would never not have done, because it was 100% the right thing to do. But I certainly wasn't, I couldn't honestly say that I did all of that with love in my heart. I'm sure there was, but that's not the place it felt like it was coming from. I can tell you that much.
Yeah, but I mean, and I think this is part of being human, and to think that like, because many people might feel like a sense of guilt around having emotions like this, and I think when we do that, we miss out on maybe understanding. Like I call emotions a check engine light, right? Like it just you got to give place to them and say like these feelings are there for a reason. And I mean, you've had just one heck of a like just a chaotic
Yeah.
life, in general. So I guess kind of maybe a question of in curiosity, in a sense, you you keep yourself quite busy with all the things that you're doing, and then you have more
Yeah.
things kind of like thrown into the mix. You know,
Yeah.
it is it like this is like your state of normal, and it would feel really weird to not be chaotically busy?
I think so. I mean, I think there was a plan once upon a time. So when I moved back to Hemel Hempstead 8 years ago, it's literally 8 years today because it popped up on my time hop on Facebook today that I bought the place. I thought, okay, I'm gonna have like a couple of crazy years because I've got to get my business settled in this
Mm.
new location, and I want to kind of get a team on board, like a staffing team who are going to be able to run the show, and then I'm going to kick back and I'm going to be chilling. And it just didn't go that way. Like it didn't happen. So I knew that I was probably already at like full capacity, or I was about to sort of reach full capacity. Man, I just didn't see all this other shit coming my way. So it kind of took what I thought was my limit and introduced me to like this whole new, like we've gone through the ceiling, now in the loft, and we've got like
Yeah.
a whole new space of limitation up here that we've just capitalized on. And then it kind of went beyond the loft, and we went for a whole extension on top of that. And there was a whole new level of what I'm able to cope with. And I definitely say like when COVID happened and I couldn't see my mum or my sister throughout all of that time because were both in care homes. So I was like, like now what am I going to do? So I hadn't got around to decorating my house yet, and I'd lived in it for like 7 years by that point.
Right.
There was literally still bare plaster on the walls. So I did that, and I do sometimes wonder if I am a bit scared of like what happens if I don't have anything to do. Like, am I just going to go, oh my God, my life's been just so chaotic and awful, and just like have this big old meltdown,
Right.
and and sort of end up in rehab or something, or if I think I probably do, if I'm being completely honest, get a bit of like buzz from just squeezing a lot into the day and moving fast.
Yeah.
And like I definitely do get a kick out of it. So I think some of it is like habitual, but I think some of it's a little bit like conscious as well.
Like the pressure and the stress keeps the open, the cortisol going, which keeps you going.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm away at the moment, so there's been a bit more headspace.
On a quasi vacation.
Yeah, but then that happens, and I'm laying there in the sun, and in myself talk, I'm like, look at this, like we're chilling, this is good, isn't it? And then it's like the other bit goes, I've had a great idea, and then it's like, right, where's a notepad? We need to get this down ready for when we go back to the office.
Right, because your life has been like, it's so chaotic compared to, again, sort of, we're comparing to, not really ever anymore, but maybe there's some path that people follow and everything like that. From a very age, you've been hesitated to saddled with, but really, I don't have a better term at this point. Just a lot on your plate, whether it was, a sister with a disability, a mom with mental health struggles, a father with alcoholism, a chaotic upbringing where you're shifted from place to place to place, struggling to form relationships and friendships and whatnot. Like, and then, we wonder, okay, well, how did you get here? It's really a testament to your strength of character, that through all of this
and
somehow,
stubborn.
yeah. So through all of this, you're doing a lot of incredible work for other people, helping them create significant change or significantly positive change in their life in kind of in a very realistic way, as you put it, not sort of through fluffy affirmations, but actually legitimately create change. now that people have kind of heard your story, I mean, I think it's remarkable, like that you're able to do all of this that you're doing. I have a great deal of
Thank you.
admiration for you. You've navigated a lot, and you've come out the other side, and you haven't yanked all your hair out and run away screaming. So, so that's a positive. You know, really, what is it about what you do now that like gives you the most joy?
Oh, good question. I mean, I still like creating and innovating. Um, and I'm very fortunate that my work goes through like seasons in a way. So I'd have a period of time when I'm teaching NLP for kids training. And so I do that in the first half of the year and then the last half of the year and kind of take the bit in the middle off from doing that. And whenever I'm training, I'm like, oh, I hate training. And then as soon as I'm finished, I'm like, oh, there's training. So yeah, no, I still love doing that. I see clients most weeks. So, you know, that's where I'm working with people literally one-on-one to help them with personal change. And that can be like super, super rewarding. I work with adults and children. So I have like a grown-up practice and my NLP for kids practice too. I get to mentor people that buy into the NLP for kids franchise. I've got a coaching program with People Building, where it's a group coaching program. So they go through NLP training, and typically business owners who, just kind of want that softer side of coaching and not just business coaching, but actually want to get their psychology straight. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, 100%. So I love doing that, and I like writing and, you know, creating. I have a podcast as well. I love doing my podcast. You've been on my podcast.
I sure have.
Yeah. So yeah, just, you know, like you, finding out about people's stories and where they've come from and you know, where they are yet to get to. Just anything really that's people related. I still really enjoy that in what I do.
And do you think in one sense, actually, all of this sort of chaotic life that you've had really works to your advantage in terms of being able to understand people? Because I would say most people haven't gone through sort of the extremes that you have in terms of life circumstances. Meaning that for the most part, no one's going to come to you with something that's like really sort of beyond your capacity to help them with, almost in a sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it does. I think it's been tremendously valuable in that you know, sometimes I will share with clients, this is an experience that's similar that I've been through, which, you know, in some cases might even be more dramatic than what they've been through. And here's how I navigated it. This might work for you too. You know, these are the tools that worked for me. Do you think that if you applied these in your life, you could see that working for you? So it's very valuable in that way. It's also good because I guess one of the things that I naturally had developed before I came to learn NLP was something called reframing, which is, you know, where you kind of take a negative and spin it on its head. And again, it's not about sort of just kind of putting a fluffy frame around it, but it's about going, actually, what can I take from this situation? What might be good in this for me, if not now, then in the future? How will future me look back on this and be grateful that the situation had happened? And I think that, you know, it's a really underrated skill, but it's something that I think I've got a bit of a fine art for, and I definitely like to share with the people that I work with.
Yeah, that's quite remarkable. So if people want to find you and learn more about what you do, let's throw this up here. Where's the best way to reach you?
So the People Building website is a good one. Tons of resources.
Hey, there's me.
On there. There's you. So you can go through the contact us page. Otherwise, it's Gemma with a G at peoplebuilding.co.uk. If you're interested in the kids side of things, then the website is NLP, and then it's a numerical for kids, kids.org for that one. And again, it's another website with a ton of resources for parents and professionals working with children, even if you're not sort of interested in the training side of things for that one.
Yeah, that's remarkable. Well, it's been super interesting talking to you because you had such a fascinating life story. If you were to try to take, this is a bit of a tough one, but if you were to try to take all that you've kind of been through, all this life experience that you had, and sort of condense this into maybe an actionable nugget of wisdom that from your experience you think people would benefit, taking away, what would that be?
I think one of the qualities that I am most grateful for having in myself is perseverance. And I think it's really important that when you are in what feels like your darkest possible hour, like persevere, because that moment is just a moment. It's not going to last forever, and you never know where you're going to land on the other side of it.
That's amazing. Yeah, just persevere. And maybe I just have one last question. What helps you persevere in those really difficult moments?
I think a few things. So knowing that this won't last forever, the reframing. So kind of, in a sense, I might reframe in what you might consider to be a more negative way by kind of going, it could be worse. It could be like this. So sort of using that as a little bit of leverage. And good self-talk, just I've learned to be a really good friend to myself. It's not 100% foolproof, but it's pretty damn good. Then I can make myself laugh. Like I can say something funny and laugh out loud. People will be like, "What's going on?" And I'm like, "I just thought of something really funny." So yeah, I think having a good dialogue and a good relationship with yourself definitely helps you to persevere.
Awesome. I think I've heard if you can laugh at yourself, you'll never cease to be amused. So,
Exactly.
well, Gemma, thank you so much for being open and vulnerable and just being willing to share what is a really, really incredible and remarkable story. You're truly an inspiration, and it's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. It was really lovely to talk to you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Between the Before and After. If you've enjoyed this episode, please like, share, subscribe, or leave a review, because that helps this podcast to reach and inspire more people. I love exploring the stories that take place between the before and after, the powerful experiences that shape who we become. And I love human potential. I love the possibilities that lie within us. So whatever you may be up against, I hope these stories inspire you, because if you're still here, your story's not done yet, so keep moving forward.
Anyone can come from any place of brokenness and destitution and build an amazing life.